The sky above the Baltic Sea, May 2025. The early morning calm was suddenly shattered by the roar of jet engines. On the radar screen at the Russian monitoring station in Kaliningrad, two unidentified signals appeared. There was no doubt it was a pair of B-52H Stratofortress bombers from the US Air Force just departing from RAF Fairford in England and approaching Russia's strategic air defense zone. Immediately the alarm sounded. Pilots from Russia's 72nd Fighter Aviation Regiment were ordered to scramble. Two Su-27s took off from the Chkalovsk base, heading straight northwest toward the American flying fortresses entering international airspace near Kaliningrad. No one was certain about the U.S. intentions, a joint exercise with NATO sending a political message or simply a routine patrol mission. But for Moscow, the presence of B-52 bombers, aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons just a few dozen nautical miles from the border, was something they could not ignore. In the sky, the B-52s maintained a steady altitude, flying in a symmetrical formation. The American pilots calmly followed the training flight plan, coordinating remotely with the Finnish F/A-18 squadron and the Swedish Gripen, preparing for a simulated strategic bombing exercise. Then an unexpected sight appeared outside the cockpit window. Two small black dots growing larger against the cold gray sky, rushing in at supersonic speed. Russian Su-27s closing in dangerously. The distance between the two sides was down to just a few miles. The Su-27 began its approach maneuvers, flying parallel, changing altitude and simulating target locking. The Russian pilots remained silent on the radio frequency, leaving only a tense atmosphere hanging over the area. Both sides understood that even a small mistake, a sharp turn, a misunderstood signal could lead to disaster. On the ground, the air defense command systems of both Russia and NATO were on the highest alert. This is not the first time encounters like this have occurred, but this time there is one key difference: the location. Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave nestled between Poland and Lithuania, has become a military hotspot in the strategic standoff between Russia and NATO. The appearance of a B-52 in this sensitive area cannot be merely coincidental, and when a Su-27 approached at a distance close enough that they could see each other with the naked eye, the atmosphere over the Baltic sky became as tense as a tightly stretched string. Inside the B-52 cockpit, the American squadron commander made the decision: maintain the course, avoid provocation, but do not retreat. This was honestly a test of resolve, professionalism, and the courage of the two largest air forces in the world. The battle of wits in the sky had begun silently and, well, in every subtle move. Beneath the calm sea surface, NATO warships and Russian air defense systems are closely monitoring every heartbeat of the sky. Everything could change in just a few seconds, and no one can be sure what will happen next. 3 days before the tense encounter over the Baltic skies, two B-52 Hotel Stratofortress bombers departed from RAF Fairford in England, embarking on a series of iconic missions as part of Operation Bomber Task Force, a recurring deployment program designed to demonstrate the U.S. Air Force's flexible presence in Europe. This particular mission was especially sensitive, flying through the airspace of multiple NATO countries, coordinating with Allied fighter jets, and conducting strategic bombing simulations near the Russian border. The B-52 is not only a symbol of the U.S. Air Force's power for over 60 years, but also a strong warning to any potential adversaries. With the capability to carry up to 68,000 pounds of bombs, long-range cruise missiles, and even nuclear weapons, the presence of a B-52 near the border of any country is considered a clear deterrent move. The fact that these bombers have approached Kaliningrad, the most heavily militarized area of Russia and Europe within just a few dozen nautical miles, sends an unmistakable political message. On the other hand, this is a sensitive time. May 2025 saw a series of military moves from both sides. Just 1 week earlier, Russia conducted a simulated nuclear exercise in the southern part of the country, while NATO was carrying out its annual Defender Europe exercise with over 30,000 troops participating, including numerous joint training activities involving the air forces of various countries. Against this backdrop, the appearance of the B-52 was nothing short of adding fuel to the fire. The Russian Air Force responded immediately. Radar stations in Kaliningrad and Leningrad quickly detected signals from the American aircraft. The command center promptly issued orders to deploy a pair of Su-27 fighter jets to intercept and closely monitor the situation. The Su-27s took off rapidly, climbing almost vertically. Within minutes, they had closed in on the formation of B-52s as these flying fortresses flew over international waters near Russian airspace. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, this was a preventive action to protect national airspace. Although the B-52s did not violate Russian territory, their mere presence near Kaliningrad amid rising tensions was enough for Moscow to send a strong message. A subsequent statement from the Kremlin affirmed any provocative actions near the borders of the Russian Federation will receive an appropriate and decisive response. However, the U.S. side affirmed that the mission was completely legal. A spokesperson for the U.S. Air Forces in Europe stated the B-52 flights took place in international airspace in full compliance with international law and aviation regulations. Operations like these help enhance coordination capabilities and maintain regional stability. Notably, U.S. allies also got involved. The Finnish and Swedish Air Forces deployed F/A-18C and JAS-39 Gripen fighter squadrons to coordinate and help protect the flight corridor for the B-52 bombers. From a distance, AWACS airborne early warning radars and KC-135 refueling aircraft closely monitored the situation. A whole silent electronic battlefield stretched across the Baltic airspace where no shots were fired, but every move was carefully measured and calculated. From the outside, the encounter looked like a psychological game. Russia responded firmly. The U.S. maintained its flight path and NATO allies tightened their formations. The B-52 continued its journey without changing course, but Russia did not back down either. Su-27s stayed close, flying parallel in a tense dance high in the sky. No one pulled the trigger, but the whole world at that moment held its breath because one small mistake, just someone breaking the rules of aerial combat, could turn this strategic game into a real confrontation. And then the consequences would no longer be confined to the radar screens. The critical moment, the distance between the Russian Su-27 and one of the two strategic B-52H bombers, was less than 3,280 feet. On the cockpit radar screen, the American pilot could see the icon of the Russian fighter jet approaching at extremely high speed, veering to the left and steadily gaining altitude. Everything in that instant seemed to freeze. Neither side used weapons or issued radio warnings, but the entire situation felt like a fragile thread stretched to its limit, just waiting for the slightest tremor to snap it apart. Inside the cockpit of the Su-27, Russian pilot, Captain Anatoly M., a veteran of combat operations in Syria, calmly reached over to switch the radar mode to temporary target lock not to fire, but to show the Americans that they had been marked. In the language of aerial combat, this gesture is like a firm yet subtle knock on the door. I see you, and I'm ready to act if necessary. In the air, the Su-27 began circling the B-52 in a tight radius. The roar of the jet engines echoed in the American pilot's ears, accompanied by intense psychological pressure. One of the two pilots aboard the B-52, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel K., later recalled, "We didn't see any external weapons on them, but at that close range, even a reckless maneuver could have caused a collision. We maintained our speed and altitude, absolutely avoiding any provocation." At the United States Air Force Strategic Operations Center in Ramstein, Germany, the duty officers were glued to their real-time data screens. The flight paths of the B-52 and Su-27 overlapped like two snakes entwined in the international airspace. Just one unexpected move could trigger an uncontrollable escalation. And then, the unexpected happened. The Su-27 suddenly made a sharp turn, surged upward, and flew over the B-52 in a maneuver that no one on the American side could have anticipated. The afterburners flared, leaving a trail of intense hot exhaust and powerful vortices. The B-52 wobbled slightly and its automatic stabilization system quickly kicked in. The crew remained calm, maintaining their flight path, but they clearly understood this was an open warning. According to tactical assessments, this was an extremely reckless maneuver. The Su-27 fighter jet is known for its agility, but flying head-on at close range to a large bomber like the B-52 is a dangerous operation, not only for the bomber, but also for the Russian pilot. A slight miscalculation in speed or aerodynamic forces could cause the two aircraft to collide, leading to disaster. Yet this move took place and was recorded by the camera system mounted in the B-52's cockpit. The video was later leaked on an internal network, showing the moment a Su-27 zoomed past, leaving a thunderous roar. Pentagon analysts confirmed that this was a type of buzzing, a dangerous close-range harassment maneuver similar to the incident in 2023 when a Su-27 flew dangerously close over a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft. But this time, the target was a B-52 carrying a nuclear deterrent emblem. Both sides, the U.S. and Russia, were immediately alerted by their command centers. A hotline was established to prevent any misunderstandings from escalating. Within minutes, the Su-27 turned around and retreated toward Kaliningrad. The other jet continued to follow at a safe distance, maintaining a parallel course and acting as an escort until the B-52 left Baltic airspace. The event seemed to have ended, but its aftermath was just beginning. That very evening, the U.S. Department of Defense issued an official statement. We confirm a dangerous approach by a Russian fighter jet toward a US B-52 aircraft conducting a lawful mission in international airspace. There were no casualties. The American pilots acted professionally to avoid escalation. Meanwhile, the Russian side took the opposite stance. A statement posted on the Ministry of Defense's Telegram channel affirmed Russian air defense forces have successfully detected and intercepted U.S. military vehicles approaching near the Kaliningrad border. Our pilots acted according to protocol to ensure maximum security of the national airspace. In the international media, the incident immediately became a hot topic.
Military channels specializing in Baltic space strategy all agreed the event could signal a new phase in the airborne Cold War between Russia and NATO, with Russian aircraft openly demonstrating a show of force while the US maintains its no-step-back strategy. The risk of an accidental conflict, even an event similar to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, is entirely possible. Experts pay special attention to the symbolic nature of this buzzing maneuver. It is not merely a tactical action, but a way for Russia to send a strong message to the US and NATO that the limits have been tested and are about to be crossed. This is no longer just routine patrol flights or radar monitoring. It is a warning delivered through concrete action and speed. For many US defense officials, the concern is not just this isolated incident, but the increasingly evident trend of escalation. Over the past 12 months, close encounters between Russian aircraft and US B-52s, B-1Bs, RC-135s and MQ-9 Reaper drones have risen significantly, with the level of risk growing steadily. At the same time, nuclear war simulation exercises from both sides have been conducted more frequently. No one wants a conflict, but over the Baltic skies with fighter jets flying head-on toward each other, it's becoming increasingly unavoidable. The American pilots returned safely to their base in England, having completed their mission, while the Su-27 landed in Kaliningrad, marking the end of a day on alert. However, this event left a significant milestone, a perilous shoulder-to-shoulder encounter in the skies between the two largest military powers on the planet. More importantly, it set a precedent. Now, both sides know that the other is willing to push further. And next time, what if the distance isn't 3,280 feet, but only about 330 feet? Or what if the Su-27's engine malfunctions during a head-on maneuver with the B-52? Or what if a young pilot, overwhelmed with stress, pulls the trigger by mistake? And so that seemingly small moment in the Baltic sky was more than just a military incident. It was a warning that in the 21st century, war might not begin with gunfire, but with a stare held too long, a maneuver flown too close, or a moment of reckless impulse. The sky remained calm, but everyone watching understood it was just waiting for the next time. Exactly 18 seconds. That's all the time the crew of the US Navy's MH-60 Romeo helicopter had to save their own lives in a warship worth over $1 billion. Arabian Sea, 9:17 in the morning, about 28 miles off the coast of Al Hudaydah, Yemen. The Romeo helicopter sliced through a thin layer of clouds following its regular patrol route. The crew remained alert, but nothing unusual was happening. They had flown over this area dozens of times before, but today everything was about to change. The weather was thick with fog, visibility under 3 miles, and the sunlight reflecting off the sea surface created a dazzling glare that blurred everything beyond sight. The pilot gently tilted the wing to adjust the altitude while squinting ahead. It was a morning that seemed peaceful. New contact bearing 045. The radar officer's shout shattered the silence. The entire crew immediately switched to emergency mode. His hand swiftly moved across the control panel, trying to analyze the object that had just appeared. Small size, altitude 2,200 feet, speed not like a fighter jet, but also not a helicopter. Doesn't match any known model. The infrared sensor flare was quickly turned toward the suspicious direction, but the image was faint and distorted by the morning air temperature. The pilot adjusted the altitude, trying to find a clearer angle. Then boom, a blurry heat spot appeared on the screen. Vampire, vampire, vampire. The warning signal for a kamikaze UAV. The Romeo immediately maneuvered, flying across the UAV's flight path and diving between the USS Gravely warship and the impending threat. The helicopter door swung open, and the CB slammed against the gunner pressed tightly against the .50 caliber GAU-21, the most powerful machine gun the Navy mounts on helicopters. He gripped the handle firmly, staring intently at the blurry area in the sight. The wind shook the aircraft. The target still hadn't come into clear view, but they knew one thing. Whatever it was flying straight towards the warship, and it wasn't carrying peace. Every second seemed to slow down. This was no longer an ordinary patrol. This was a life-or-death race. The radar switched modes from surface search to air search. The display lit up brightly. Concentric circles appeared, and in the center was a small but definite signal. A target approaching. Speed 270 knots, steady heading, locked onto the USS Gravely, no doubt about it. That is a Houthi suicide drone. The signal from the Samad 3 kamikaze UAV was becoming increasingly clear by the second. On the radar screen it appeared as just a tiny dot. But through the experienced eyes of the MH-60 Romeo helicopter crew, it was a blade hurtling straight toward the heart of the USS Gravely warship. The radar officer adjusted the AN/APS-153 radar system to its dedicated airborne target search mode. Each parameter was filtered to reduce noise, enhancing accuracy and completely eliminating interference from sea waves. On the clear screen, the UAV appeared with erratic flight patterns, clearly showing signs of automatic navigation, not remote-controlled by a human but driven by a programmed suicide algorithm. In the cockpit, the pilot ordered a switch to combat configuration. The Romeo gently descended, approaching the UAV from an angle to widen the sensor's field of view. Underneath the helicopter, the dome-shaped radar array rotated continuously. This was the electronic eye that helped them identify the enemy through the thick fog. But radar alone isn't enough. At the nose of the aircraft, the FLIR system, a next-generation infrared targeting scope, is operating at full capacity. Despite the thick thermal interference in the area, it still detected a faint silhouette gliding across the horizon, a temperature difference of 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit, just enough to lock onto the UAV. As soon as the lens image confirmed the drone's body shape, a rounded nose with wings folding backward, all doubts immediately vanished. Gravely, this is Venom 04. Target confirmed, Samad 3. Requesting permission to engage. The pilot's voice came over the radio. On command, the Romeo immediately made a sharp left turn, moving into combat position. The gunner by the door kept his hand on the GAU-21, his muscles tensing with every fiber. The wind blasted against his face. The rotor blades roared, and through the scope the UAV was growing larger by the second. Distance, just over 1 mile. Crosswind, small target, high speed. Shooting too early will miss. Shooting too late means no second chance. Hold the aircraft steady. Prepare to fire. The pilot adjusted the flight angle, keeping the helicopter stable in mid-air. Strong gusts of wind shook Romeo violently. The GAU-21 fired with a thunderous blast. shaking the entire frame of the helicopter. Each tracer round streaked out in bright orange, blazing against the pale blue sky. The first burst skimmed just inches from the UAV's wing. Tactical Officer VO, shift left 6 feet. The tactical officer shouted, tracking the projectile. The pilot gritted his teeth and gently nudged the control stick. The helicopter moved a few feet, just enough for the gunner to adjust. The second shot whistled through the air. This time it hit the target. The sight tube vibrated from the impact. The bullet pierced through the UAV's body, gouging into the left wing, causing the drone to shake violently. A plume of smoke rose and then the left wing tore apart. The drone spun out of control, falling freely like a dead leaf torn away in mid-air. The sniper didn't let up. The third volley was fired, striking directly into the remaining body of the UAV. A small explosion flashed, sending debris flying in all directions, falling into the sea. Pilot VO, target eliminated. The pilot reported to the warship, his voice remaining calm despite the surge of adrenaline. The entire crew breathed a sigh of relief, but they knew this was not the end. On the radar, several faint signals are appearing at the edge of the scanning area. It's unclear whether they are fishing boats or other UAV launch platforms. However, the suspicion is becoming increasingly certain. Inside the compartment, the marksman checked the ammo box. It was still half full, enough for one more firefight if necessary. But if this was a swarm attack like the recent warning from CENTCOM, then every single bullet had to count. There was no room for waste. The sky grew quiet once again, but beneath that false calm, they could sense something approaching. Less than 10 minutes after the recent victory, the MH-60 Romeo returned to its patrol position, this time with eyes wider open than ever before. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew that was just the opening shot. The radar continued scanning. The screen still showed a few strange signals in the distance, unclear what they were. Then something unexpected happened. Operations Officer VO, unidentified electromagnetic signal bearing 055 S-band frequency. The operations officer sat up abruptly. This wave pattern didn't match the typical UAV control signal, but the frequency was very close to the one previously used to control Houthi suicide drones. He immediately isolated the signal, boosted the amplification, and ran it through the Combat Electronic Library for comparison. Operations Officer VO, it could be a new variant of the drone control system. His voice hardened. The signal is intermittent. It could be due to terrain obstruction. Alternatively, the other party might be deliberately transmitting in cycles to avoid detection. But the tension feels like a taut string stretching throughout the cockpit. Although the radar hasn't detected any objects, the crew knows clearly there is something out there and it's getting closer. The Romeo changed its formation. The pilot gently adjusted the control stick, fine-tuning the flight angle to optimize electronic signal collection. No need to transmit, no need to turn on the radar. The ESM system began to listen to the electromagnetic battlefield. Like a pair of invisible ears, it could detect every emission across a vast airspace. This is the invisible advantage of the US Navy in modern warfare. While the enemy is broadcasting signals to control their UAVs, the Romeo simply remains silent, listening in. It doesn't reveal its position. It doesn't emit any signals. It only receives and analyzes. But while the crew was focused on monitoring the faint signals coming through the misty void, disaster struck from a completely different direction. Alarm, VO, missile alert, left side, left side. The alarm shattered the silence. The screen showed the flight path of a missile hurtling toward them at over Mach 2.2. Distance less than 3.7 miles. Reaction time under 8 seconds. No orders needed. Everyone switched to survival mode. The pilot sharply tilts the wing, banks the plane to the right, and simultaneously drops altitude abruptly. The wind howls, G-forces press their bodies into the seats. The operations officer slams his hand on the control panel, activating a series of automatic counterattacks. Operations Officer, VO, activate LQ-47 countermeasures. From both sides of the aircraft fuselage, the flare launch ports opened. Within a fraction of a second, 6, 7, then 8 rounds of flares were fired in a dispersed pattern. Each flare burned brighter than the heat of the helicopter's exhaust. The pilot glanced at the left window, clearly seeing a thin white smoke trail like a thread, the tip of the missile, a small bright dot rapidly approaching. The fateful moment the missile chased the helicopter but suddenly veered off, drawn in by a flare with a higher temperature. A flash of explosion lit up behind the tail of the plane. The shockwave slammed into Romeo's body, causing the helicopter to shake violently, but there were no malfunction alarms, no fuel leak warnings. They had survived. Operations Officer, VO, confirmed the missile was intercepted, no damage. The operations officer said, his voice still slightly trembling. Immediately, the radar system detected a small boat near the coast of Yemen. Very likely a MANPADS launcher. The USS Gravely also locked onto the target, and the weapons on deck began turning in that direction. But at this moment, the most important thing was that the Romeo was still intact and still capable of fighting. They just narrowly avoided an aerial assassination attempt typical of the Houthis' asymmetric warfare-style ambush, surprise, retreat. But this time the attack failed, and the price to pay will come soon. The MH-60 Romeo gradually regained altitude and turned back toward the patrol area. The sky over the Arabian Sea was eerily calm, but no one on the flight crew dared to relax. The recent electromagnetic signal, the nearly successful missile launch, and the suicide drone just now were only the prelude to something much bigger. The flight crew clearly understood the Houthis wouldn't stop with just one drone, nor would they be foolish enough to fire a single missile and then retreat. This was a probing move, a test-the-water strike to gauge the response, a way to measure the level of defense before launching a real attack. On the USS Gravely warship, the defense systems are being switched to the highest alert status. Radar stations, missile launchers, and CIWs are all turning toward the direction of the unusual signal. If a swarm attack occurs, they won't be caught off guard. Meanwhile, in the air, the crew of the Romeo continued to hold their position, still scanning the radar, still listening to every electromagnetic frequency in the sky. They were not allowed to rest, not allowed to lose focus, not allowed to let a single target slip through. Just one small gap could cost the lives of more than 300 sailors on that warship. But that day, the Houthis learned a lesson. Messing with the US Navy, especially when they are on high alert, is a recipe for disaster. With a precise shot from the GAU-21, the Samad-3 UAV became a sacrifice for boldness. Equipped with a world-class sensor system, a MANPADS missile was neutralized before it could even lock onto the target. And above all, with unwavering determination, the Romeo flight crew held their ground in the skies. The first victory of a US Navy helicopter in modern aerial combat. A warning shot that couldn't be any clearer. Next time, if the Houthis want to try again, they should probably be better prepared, or just never try again.